A highly anticipated hockey rematch is on deck for this week, but will Team USA be healthy enough to have the same success they did in round one? Could we see a homecoming for a Broncos legend and a potential reuniting of one of Sean Payton's favorite tools in his toolbox? And how should the Broncos address free agency in the draft as it relates to the needs they have on their roster? All things to come on today's rundown. Our favorite NFL insider, James Palmer, will join us in a little bit. But before that, I want to talk a little puck because I didn't get a chance to come on the air the day after Team USA's rousing victory over Canada in the early round of this Four Nations face-off, which, by the way, especially being put side to side and go head to head with the NBA's excuse of an all-star game and an all-star week, it does go to show you that the seismic gap between those two from an entertainment perspective, from a value standpoint, and just a general watchability is massive. The NBA clearly doesn't care about their all-star product, so therefore neither will I and won't be bringing it up on today's show. If you want to hear how I think about it, you can certainly echo the comments of Draymond Green, Stephen A. Smith, and really just the general social media population about the whole thing. But as it relates to hockey, we saw Team USA and Canada square off on Saturday of last week in a game that erupted into three separate fights in a span of 9 game seconds. And I think that there's been a lot of buildup in the animosity between these two teams. One, you have nationalistic pride between the two nations. It's a true best-on-best format in international play, which hasn't happened in nearly a decade in the sport of hockey. And then you factor in there's booing to the U.S. national anthem. You're on Canadian turf in Montreal. And the amount of NHL talent that is just oozing from each of these rosters boiled over. And we saw the physicality start the game in the first 10 seconds, and it never really let up from there. And fortunately for Team USA, they were able to ride the offensive firepower of the Tkachuk brothers and kind of lean on Connor Hellebuck's dominance in net to be able to beat Canada 3-1. But Canada was able to secure the win that they needed in order to make it to the championship round and get their chance at a rematch next Thursday. The big difference this time around, we've already got that aggression out, okay? We saw it came to fisticuffs, and now both teams have dealt with injuries and illnesses, in Team Canada's case, since then. And so the question remains, is Team USA healthy enough to withstand what you know is going to be coming from Team Canada in a strong response? There's no way you can have Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, and Connor McDavid and the talent that Team Canada has and not expect them to rise to the occasion with all those other factors involved and make a response to Team USA. So the question is, will they? I don't know. I think Team USA, who's dealing with injury and illnesses themselves, we've seen news that Quinn Hughes may be coming up to help Team USA, although it seems weird, and I don't quite understand all the rules that, like, Quinn Hughes is being called up to Team USA, but because he's 7th on the list, they may need another injury or illness or some kind of vacancy in order for him to actually jump on the roster before Thursday. Some of that seems to be, for me, kind of Team USA getting in its own way, or just the sport of hockey getting in its own way with some of that stuff. But regardless, I expect this one to have, if it doesn't match the level of intensity and sports bloodlust that the first round did, I expect it to be fairly close. It was a little disappointing to see Team USA kind of sputter a little bit against Sweden last night. But to a certain degree, it's kind of an expected loss in some ways when you factor in what they have coming. I mean, we see this all the time in week 17 or 18 in the NFL for a team that has locked up their playoff standing. They don't necessarily trot out their A game. The Chiefs did it to the Broncos, and it resulted in a 30-plus point blowout here at Empower Field. We see it in the NBA, really just across sports, that Team USA didn't have as much to play for because they had locked in their positioning against Canada. And that's why you saw Jake Ottinger in net, who did not look the same as Connor Hellebuck and gave up 2 unanswered goals to complete the rest of the game against Sweden, but they had more to play for. So I don't know that you can necessarily take Team USA showing against Sweden and say that that's what it's going to be like when they play Canada in Boston. By the way, another factor to this four nations face-off that I think is underrated is that the first time they played, it was on enemy territory. If you're Team USA, this time around, it's on the home turf, and there are a lot of fan bases that I think would be aggressive in terms of having to play in front of, scattered throughout the United States. Boston's definitely high on that list. Okay. I don't expect it to be a very warm, welcoming crowd in Beantown this week. So I think that Team USA has the depth, especially on the forward, among the forward grouping, to be able to keep up or keep pace with any team internationally, let alone Team Canada. The defenseman, grouping, if Quinn Hughes is able to make an impact there, I think that they can still be strong. But I don't think that this is going to be the strongest showing from Team USA compared to what they showed last time, because that emotion's not there anymore. I shouldn't say anymore. It's not going to be there in the same fashion. It's hard to get up for 2 title fights in, a span of a week or so. So I expect it to come out fiery. I think the hometown crowd will be energizing, but make no mistake, I think you're going to get a pretty significant punch from Team Canada. And we will dive into this a little bit more as the week goes on, as the game is just about 72 hours away, 40 to 48 hours away, excuse me. In the NFL world, I do think that we have some pretty interesting conversations coming up as it relates to free agency, because the Broncos are going to have to handle that first before they get to the draft. And there's so much talk this time of year. Draft season starts basically as soon as the NFL calendar turns, and even before that, because 90+% of the teams, by the time the Super Bowl rolls around, are not playing anymore. And there's going to be a lot of continued discussion about where the Broncos should go in the draft. They have the 20th overall selection, and they are continuing to work their way out of the cap hell that was instigated by the release of Russell Wilson. But that really amplifies the free agency discussion, which again does come first. And I think there's going to be some interesting names that pop up as it relates to the Broncos' needs and who becomes available. And that brings 2 particular names into play in Von Miller and Taysom Hill, 2 players who, one, has a strong connection and legendary status with the Denver Broncos, the Super Bowl 50 MVP, and one of the longest tenured Broncos of this last decade or so, and Sean Payton's favorite tool for a pretty significant length of time in Taysom Hill. Both guys who could be potential cut candidates for their respective teams in Buffalo and in New Orleans. My question that I look forward to tossing across to James Palmer here in a minute is, do either of those names really make sense for the Broncos? And I think in order to answer that question, you know what? Look who it is. It is our NFL insider to the stars, James Palmer. Your ears must have been burning because I think I mentioned your name exactly 14 seconds ago, and here you are.
Well, they're small, these ears, but they work well, apparently. Now you're going to stare at them the whole time that they're tiny, but yeah.
James, the concept of free agency and the NFL draft and kind of the approach that we think the Denver Broncos might take, because obviously there's two different goals, I think, in mind as it relates to free agency and the draft. When you're looking at free agency, I think it's players who are ready to step in and make a more immediate impact. You're usually trying to sign starters who, either for cap concerns or financial contract extension reasons, are being moved on from by their current team and looking for a new home. Whereas the draft, you're looking at more of an investment, and you're not always drafting for starters. Sometimes you're drafting for depth, and you get more darts to play with than you typically do in free agency. So I think there's going to be a lot of discourse in the coming month or so about how the Denver Broncos attack free agency and the draft in that order compared to what their needs are. And we're seeing more and more news come out from all the different teams around the NFL about potential franchise tag candidates as that window opens up today. We saw the news about T. Higgins, who you and I have talked about, and a lot of people in Denver have been curious about, that there's plans from Cincinnati's side to franchise tag him. But then there's other names, I think, that pop up people's eyes, especially Broncos fans here in Denver. Somebody like Von Miller, who could be a cap casualty, a cut candidate in Buffalo, is obviously on the back end of his career, but still in Buffalo, at least on a roster that's primed to compete for a Super Bowl, was able to provide, impact in a little bit of a lesser role. And then a name like Taysom Hill, who served as a joker type role for Sean Payton for a long time. And although he's turning 35, I believe, this year.
I don't know when he turns 35.
Yeah, 30. He's on the verge of 35. He's only been in the NFL for 7 seasons, I believe. So he's not as weathered as his birth certificate might stand in NFL terms. So my question, James, to you was, based on where the Broncos are at right now and the overarching needs that they have, do you think either of these names make sense for somebody like Sean Payton and George Payton to go after in free agency?
Yeah, it's two schools of thought, Richie, on team building, right? And it's where you stand in terms of the trajectory of next season and the next 4 to 5. And that's always the evaluation that every general manager is working on. Now, right now, you could put the Broncos in the same group as I would with Washington, with Houston, as teams that are operating with a rookie quarterback contract. And do we now go and make a move? I think you could go look at Houston and maybe go, is this an example of what we could see from Denver heading into year 2? What did Houston go do after that really, really sensational rookie year by C.J. Stroud? They went and got Joe Mixon. They went and got Stephon Diggs. They went and got, Danico Autry. Half the league hated him, but Aziz Al-Shahir after the play on Trevor Lawrence. He was actually a great dude, but just a bad play.
Yeah.
They went out and picked some pieces, right? They went to they trade for Danielle Hunter. They go and pick up Danielle Hunter, and Jonathan Grenard leaves. My point is, they went out and got pretty aggressive after what they saw from C.J. Stroud in his rookie year. And I'm kind of curious if Sean Payton and George Payton are going, well, we look at what we had from our rookie season of Bo Nix. Let's go get aggressive and strike while the iron's hot to take advantage of this rookie quarterback contract, which we couldn't make this aggressive move last year because of the salary cap constraints we had with Russell Wilson. So I could see them for some spots getting aggressive, but every offseason is a little bit different. And I think if you're looking for receivers, I think in the free agent market, you're going to overpay probably than what they're valued. That's usually the case. I think it might be exponential this season because of the limited resources of receivers in the draft. It's why we're hearing about trading for a receiver, right? And so when there's limited spots, the price is going to go up, right? That's why, we've talked about T. Higgins on here a lot. You mentioned, I've been saying, the buzz starting in New Orleans is he's going back. And that was not the case during the year. I think Cincinnati is seeing the case of all right, if we lose him, what do we do? And so it's thin out there, and you would overpay for some of these guys. Do the Broncos want to overpay to to put this thing together as quickly as possible, or are they going to slow burn it? It's going to be interesting to see. They have the options. They do. Just in the free agent world, I think you're going to have to overpay this offseason. And maybe they're okay with that, but I don't know. Are you? I might not be.
I think it's very situational because I do think, and you kind of alluded to it, that the nature of free agency is general is that, a lot of times you're paying A+ prices for B+ product,
but on the team they're with.
Correct. And it's always a red flag for me that when you have a star player or a prominent player who's expected to be the crown jewel of the offseason, and there's a new one every year, that it's okay, the team that knows them best, that's worked intimately with them night in and night out, practice after practice, has said, you know what, going forward, we don't think that you are worth it anymore. But then they go on the open market and some team ends up paying 1.5 times whatever that value is to get the same product. And then it's a gamble of whether or not you were right or you're wrong. I think that, the Tennessee Titans might look at letting go of Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown and some of these things they've had in the past and go, maybe we misevaluated that. But then there's other, right? There's other situations where you could argue the opposite. But I think that also, you have to be okay with overpaying because in a certain degree, that's the markup on the price that you get for trying to microwave this. You can draft guys on the cheap, but it's an investment. You and I can change our own oil, James, in the driveway if we really want to get the pan out. And, a quart of Valvoline's not that expensive, but I don't want to do that. You probably don't want to do that. I'm probably not the best guy to do it. So I take it to Firestone and they do it for, $50, $60, whatever it is. That to me is like free agency in a microcosm. So I think I'm okay with overpaying in certain situations, but I don't think that I think that wide receiver, especially with the thin, limited market that you described, is probably not one that I would be jumping out of my chair to do.
No, I don't think so. And I think like the future of Cortland Sutton's kind of like a big, like he's kind of the crux of what you're doing moving forward, right? Are you giving Court an extension? My personal opinion is if you gave him an extension, where's that number around? It's not around 30 million a year like you would have to pay a T. Higgins to come in here. I think if you look at what, and this is just a thought, if you look at the end of this free agency time period, and you look at the receivers at the top of that group, and they all get, all land somewhere, and if you end up looking at their production over the last couple of years, or what it could be over the next couple of years, compared to Cortland Sutton, and you look at where they signed in terms of money and what an extension with Cortland would be like, I think I might take the Cortland extension over what some of these guys are. You know what I'm saying? Like you saw what happened the last 2 years with two different quarterbacks. We had 10 touchdowns 2 seasons ago. It took a minute to get going at the beginning of this season, but then you saw the type of player that he was becoming once again. And like, if you add a dynamic tight end to this team and you have a better running game to this team and you can do both of those things through the draft, the extension you give Cortland's probably not going to be at the number of what some of these guys get in free agency. And I would go, that might be better money spent than going and getting a Keenan Allen. Now, if it's somebody like Chris Godwin, JP really likes Chris Godwin. That is a complete football player. That is a blocking machine.
Yes.
Yards after the catch nightmare. Like does everything. Plays inside, plays outside.
There you go.
The injuries have been a bummer for him. No better way to put it, honestly, with the ACL and then the fractured ankle. But he's still only 28.
Right.
Like a complete player like that, maybe I do pay for. But do you have him and Cortland on the field at the same time? It's kind of a similar player.
That was going to be my question, James, was factoring in that T. Higgins is likely probably out of that race. And I think that, it's another testament for these NFL organizations, when you have a franchise level quarterback who goes out and bangs his gavel over and over again on the podium, the way Joe Burrow has done about, well, the Eagles are paying everybody. Why can't we? And essentially, calling the bluff of an ownership group that maybe hasn't been accused of being
Why are the Eagles paying everybody, though, by the way? Because what does Howie Roseman do?
He drafts well.
And then he does the deals early. He doesn't wait. Kansas City's getting bit by waiting right now. The Dallas Cowboys get bit by waiting. Do your deals early, man. Just listen to – we all should just listen to Howie.
I mean, it's a – right?
Early, right? How early and I bet you in 2 years you're going to be going, Devontae Smith is a bargain right now because he got the deal done early.
Yep. No, you're 100% on it. So I think that it's one of those situations where – if you're the Broncos and T. Higgins is out, then does your strategy now become, if you're looking at maybe Chris Godwin as that next tier, or, we've talked about Cooper Kupp. There's also other names like Brandon Cooks and other kind of lower tier receivers who might be out there. Now that T. Higgins is out of the race, should the strategy for George and Sean Payton be, if it's bringing in a free agent wide receiver, it's with the understanding that it is this guy and a Cortland Sutton extension, whereas with T. Higgins, it was basically going to have to be one or the other.
Well, yeah, it was. And you were going to try to make T. Higgins your one. And let's be crystal clear here. That is not the universal thought across the league when I talk to people. There are plenty of teams that think he is a surefire 2, like a great 2, but he is not a 1. And that is the way some teams have dug their heels in, and they're going, well, I'm not paying that for a 2. Like, we can't pay that for a 2 a lot of times. I don't know if you could operate with Cortland Sutton and Chris Godwin. Like, I'm not saying as an offense you can.
Yeah, in what sense?
Offense you fully can. I'm saying in terms of you've already moved pieces to get Devon Vele touches and to get Troy Franklin touches. Like, you go and get Chris Godwin, somebody's development is getting dramatically hindered. Now, that can be evaluated by the coaching staff and by George Payton going, no, we need to do that because we didn't see X, Y, and Z from Troy Franklin. We need to do that because we're not going to see, the return on the draft pick in here. But it seems to me like they want these draft picks to play and grow. It seems like that's been the case. But the way the season went, that can always change your thinking, right? That was our thinking at the start of the season, right? We want to get these young guys touches, and we want to make sure that they grow with their quarterback. But when you saw Bo Nix play the way he played, and you saw the defense play the way that they played, like, maybe your thinking changes afterwards, and you go and you get somebody like Chris Godwin, and then you draft your tight end, and then you draft your running back. And you can't pay all your skill guys, but you can find ways to put the group together when you're not paying the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of goes back to the initial question. that I had was, as it relates to the Broncos, is how they should approach, based on the positions of need that they have, free agency versus the draft. So, James, when you look at names that float out there that we think and we've talked about before could be good fits for the Broncos, like an Aaron Jones, who's going to be a free agent, he could easily fill a void, at least in theory and on paper, that Javonte Williams and that running back room left a lot to be desired. A guy like Nick Bolton could fill that void at inside linebacker that the Broncos have been trying to fill since the Super Bowl years. We've talked about Cooper Kupp and Chris Godwin and others at the wide receiver position. So those among the free agent market. And then you have the draft side of things where you could fill a lot of those needs too, just in a different way. It would look more like a Ashton Genty, Devin Neal, Cam Scatterbo, a Jahad Campbell out of Alabama, maybe, or a Luther Burden wide receiver type, out of Missouri. So in your mind, James, if you're George Payton's new Darren Muji, and you're right there, what would you be saying to George Payton? Open. Yeah. So what would you be encouraging George Payton and Sean Payton to do and the like as it relates to attacking free agency in the draft with those positions we've discussed?
Yeah, let's start with running back. And I remember having this conversation with Joe Mixon in the locker room after the Texans lost to the Chiefs. And I was like, man, you played a big part in the perception of this position and its pay scale and the way we look at it moving forward. And he was like, we were on a group chat, man. That was our goal. And he's talking about him and Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley and what they did with their previous team and what they were able to do their first year with their new team. All of them thrived, right? They all played great after their team said, we can't invest in this position financially. I still am of the school, like that group is so small. I only pay my running back if I'm part of, and because I'm now the right-hand man of George Payton, right? So
yes.
Now I got to speak in that like tone. Listen, we only believe in paying those guys if you're part of that top group. I mean, right. That top group, that bell cow. Some people have asked me like, is the return of the bell cow in the NFL? And I was like, no. Like, but if you have one,
right,
you lean into it. And there's probably 5 of them in the league, and that's it. So if you don't have the talent of those guys who are just rare players, you have to go through the draft for your running back. Like, you don't overpay, and you don't pay the position in a lot of people's minds in the league, Richie, if you're not paying to get that top group, right? Like, Saquon's actually not getting paid that much money in the grand scheme of things. But if you're not getting that type of talent, I don't think you really even pay it all that much. There's plenty of teams that are just churning through backs and they're fine with it. And I think Denver could be fine with it too. They've just missed on a couple. Like, I think they hit Javonte Williams, sadly. The injury changed everything, and he just hasn't been the same player.
Without a doubt.
And so, you look at the way Kansas City has done it. Like, we always stay in the division, right, and see the way teams are doing it. Like, it was draft Kareem Hunt, and he was, like, insane for a period of time, right, for them. And then you draft Isaiah Pacheco, and, like, they haven't spent on the running back spot. And I think Denver can totally do this and not spend on the running back spot. I think you can draft for sure. You can draft 2 backs in this draft, no lie. And I think you can fill your running back void there. So my point with that, starting with the backs, is I don't spend on the position unless it's the cream of the crop. And then I would say I would go out and reach for a middle linebacker. They're hard to find in the draft. They're valued very differently from organization to organization. I remember asking Brett Veach about this. I'm like, he's got like 4 middle linebackers that are like all pretty good, right? Like Leo Chanel and Drew Tranquil and Nick Bolton. And like, he's like, we value it. Not everybody else values it. And I wouldn't mind going to get like a Zach Bond, who's a free agent, who's maybe the best middle linebacker in football.
Yeah.
Or a Nick Bolton, because what the difference there is the number isn't really high on middle linebackers. Like you don't pay tons of money to a middle linebacker. And so how do they value that position? I think we're going to find that out because everybody doesn't value it the same. And we're going to find out how they value that spot. And then, yeah, what else do we want to talk about? The tight end, I think, is totally...
Yeah, that's obviously one that you're going to lean heavily on the draft for, unless you want to be the latest guy who steps up and says, I can fix Kyle Pitts, or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Good luck with that. But, like, I would say, talking to people this morning, we got 2 really, really guys at the top, right? We know at the tight end spot. And then there's still other tight ends in this draft, though. And the concern that a lot of people have is, well, we just saw like what Sam Laporta did 2 years ago. We just saw what Brock Bowers did this past year. these guys might go a couple spots higher than we probably should have them
The
go.
bump, the
And that's what
Bowers
happens.
bump.
It's the Bowers bump, yeah. And so I still think at 20 you have the opportunity, and you have the flexibility to maybe move if you're sensing something. But I am curious about that position. There's a number of them in the draft, but do they all just go up just a shade? And are you willing to reach? I think that's the main point of it. And so I think they've been really good at balancing this in Denver, honestly, like free agency to the draft. But you're going to have to make the free agent decisions first. And that's always the tricky part of it, which is why people argue that you should be flipped. But
Sure. True. Yeah, and I would understand the logic in there. It almost just kind of feels one of those things where, like, by and large, because there's so many other things to put your attention on, it's like, well, this is the way the calendar's always been in the NFL, so we'll just leave it that way. As it relates to
you mentioned Vaughn, by the way. Yeah. So, like, do you want to spend on edge?
No. No. It's one thing to spend on edge if you're a team like the Rams when Von Miller left the Broncos, or the Bills, where you are like, hey, we are a literal piece away from winning a Super Bowl, or at least contending for one in a serious way. And while the Broncos, I think, overperformed and outkicked their coverage a little bit, outpaced their projection to make the playoffs in Bo's rookie year. I don't think I think there is a layer there, in terms of the difference. Just like I don't think that going out and signing a 35-year-old Taysom Hill, while it might be intriguing, especially at a lower level. I mean, you might be talking about like a 1-year, $5 million deal type of situation. If you're not really throwing that much scratch out there, then maybe, but I don't think you find that. It's like, wow, Sean Payton found his Joker for the next 3 years, kind of thing. So those two I'm not that intrigued by.
I invest into the D-line, Richie. You mentioned like you don't make a move on Vaughn. I go draft 2 D tackles.
I was just going to ask you, because we talked about the Bowers bump, and I think that you're going to see a little bit of a perfect storm convergence, in a sense of you're going to get, I think, a little bit of a bump on interest in the trenches on the defensive line because of what we saw Philly do to Kansas City, and really most teams all season en route to their Super Bowl, which was just absolutely eat teams alive between the tackles on the defensive side of the ball. And it seems to be converging with an insanely loaded and stacked class at the interior defensive lineman position. So do you think that the Broncos will, or it would be wise for them to, lean into that bump and go interior defensive line early and maybe often in the draft?
I would 100% agree with that. I think this is a copycat league. I think people are going to look at what Howie Roseman has done, which is not just focus on the trenches on both sides of the ball, which is what he's always done. He doubled down. He doubled down when he already had players. Everybody's going to be like, well, John Franklin Myers is a really good player. I'm like, great, get another one. Like go get some more interior guys. And so the thing that's happened in this league is those interior defensive tackles that can create pressure and those interior defensive linemen that can be so disruptive become so much more valuable, and you could almost argue more valuable than a lot of edge players because of the athletic ability of the quarterbacks that are playing in the league now. They can avoid an edge rush. Like they're too athletic. The Chiefs don't even care about tackles the last couple of years, right? It was like, let's get a great interior 3. Pat can handle the rest. And I think that's almost similar to like the way Bo can operate. You've seen Bo get flushed out. So what did Philly do? It's like, let's let interior D linemen disrupt everything and keep our edges so wide that the quarterback can't get outside. The real player in all of that is the interior pressure, because it's too short. It used to be the thing that was always going against Brady, where it was like, he's too good in the pocket against edge rushers to be that dynamic. But if you pressure him up the middle, there's no place for him to go. And I think Philly has shown everybody that, to where there's so much importance into how they build a team that people are going to go, it's the best roster we've seen in some time. Where they focus most of their capital in their draft picks, the defensive line and the offensive line. And so if you're Sean Payton and George Payton, I'm going, let's follow that, because that never changes in football. And I think Sean Payton is confident enough that he can make skill players better on the offensive side of the ball, and maybe, thin things up there a little bit. Go coaching, we can improve these things. You can't, bodies and talent matter in the trenches more than anything.
Yeah, I think traditionally speaking, I seem to resonate with the philosophy as it relates to, free agency and talent acquisition of like, I think you more often than not, you'll have success if you draft offense and you pay defense in the spots where you need it. But in this situation where you've got a loaded defensive tackle class, I think I saw Daniel Jeremiah put out there that last year in the entire draft class, he had like 12 starting caliber grades on defensive linemen. This year he has 24 and counting. So it's just one of those situations where if that many people are reaching that same conclusion, it's probably a pretty safe bet. And I think that when you look at to your point, the impact that an interior defensive lineman can have kind of in the center there and the way teams are guarding around that. I mean, you don't have to go back that far to look at the dominance that Aaron Donald was able to have 100%. In the middle of the offensive line coming against them. And even what we saw with Zach Allen this past year, the way he was able to generate sack production and disrupt plays from the very center, because the shortest distance.
What helped him though, Richie? Like, go ask, have you ever talked to Zach Allen about it? He's like, I don't have the year I have without DJ Jones and Jonathan Franklin Myers.
Yep, guys on each side that command attention themselves.
They have to. Yeah, exactly. And then life's easier on a Zach Allen. It's easier on your edge guys, in all honesty. Like, Nolan Smith's out there running, against one-on-ones all day long.
Yeah, because you can only plug so many holes as an offensive line. You can't say, hey, we got to put extra attention here, and here. We only got 5-6 guys.
Yep. And so when you guys have guys like Denver has, I think on the outside that have just great motors in Jonathan Cooper and Nick Benito, and the way that they can just go for days rushing the quarterback. Well, that type of player with great interior pressure is a really good match, honestly.
Yeah, the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. So if you can get that pressure right from the face of the center backwards into the quarterback's face, there is no stepping up in the pocket at that point. And then you force the quarterback to move to one side, left or right, where you hope your edge rushers are there to take him. So I agree with you. I think that.
With that really quick, Richard, I just want to say this because you made my. This is what we do here. You made my mind go. Is like then you also. In turn, if you keep drafting well up there and you keep doing what has Philly always done, they haven't really cared about the middle linebacker spot because a player of less ability can play so much better when they got that in front of them, and they got rush lanes and they got lanes that they can fill up and they can like Nick Bolton's a great player, but he's got Chris Jones in front of him. Like so, if you have those type of players on the defensive line. Then your linebacker, like an Alex Singleton, can play even better if he stays or something like that. You know what I mean? You make your players behind them, you make life so easy on them that they can play at a better level, and then you don't have to spend on that spot, which is why Philly rarely spends on a middle linebacker.
You mentioned Alex Singleton, and on the way out, I did want to just kind of ask that. Is Alex Singleton somebody that fans here in Broncos country should be a little suspicious about being a potential cut candidate for the Broncos?
They don't save a ton, right? Do that? I mean, I think they save some.
I think it's like a few $million.
It's not a bunch. Yeah. I saw him at NFL Honors. Actually, had a chance to talk with him after the show a little bit, and said he was running. Said he feels good. Obviously, was like, I wish I was part of this defense that was out there. I think if you have that in front of him, like he can make plays. But I mean, yeah, it's probably the one of the few players we're looking at going like this is definitely one we got to keep an eye on this offseason. I don't know if it behooves them to do it.
Sure.
But they definitely have some more to work with than they did a year ago. So if there's something they want to go and get and it helps them do that,
Yeah, it's one of those situations where they were playing well with Singleton before he got hurt and things looked like they were clicking and they didn't miss a ton of beats.
And they didn't think Cody Barton played the way he played.
Right.
If you ask anybody in that building,
right.
Like, I didn't see this coming.
Yeah, they didn't end up skipping a ton of beats with him out there, but that doesn't mean that next year, when the roster dynamic looks a little bit different, the schedule's different, things don't break the exact same way, that you look back on it and say, oh yeah, we would have been better with Alex Singleton this year than we were last year kind of thing. So I agree with you. It's not, we had that offseason for the Broncos last offseason with the massive cap casualties. You got rid of Russ, you cleared out Justin Simmons, big name guys. The Jerry Jeudy trade. So I don't anticipate there being a lot of spicy kind of conversation about the Broncos this year because you can only do that so many years in a row, I suppose. So something to keep an eye out for, James. As always, I appreciate you joining us every week and your insight around the NFL just brings me so much knowledge, and I'm thrilled to be able to share that with all of our listeners.
We're on the same page today.
Yeah, it felt good. I felt it. I don't know. It was good for you. It was good for me.
Be in this front office if they had two chairs that are.
You know what? The headquarters is only about 10 minutes from where I'm currently sitting. I might just pop over there and just drop a word. Hey, you know what I mean?
Is Muji's office available? Yeah, that's what you're looking for.
I love it. James, thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch up again next week, my friend.
Sounds good, brother.
To the rest of you out there, have a great rest of your day. We'll catch you same time, same place tomorrow.
I do what I love what I do. It's second nature to put in the work.